Lebanese pound devalues by 90% overnight. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. We've had all sorts of action overnight with the interest rate decision by the Fed in the US and markets rallying off that news. But we'll talk about that on Monday with Alex. Today, we wanted to focus on something else which we thought was especially relevant for gold and silver holders. And Branko has put together an excellent piece on a topic we think everyone should be paying attention to as a really quite important reminder about what can go wrong. So how are you going today, Branko?
Good. Glad to talk about this topic. It's very interesting and very volatile situation.
It certainly is. And I really didn't know much about this until you brought this to my attention yesterday, actually, when you were talking about what you were going to put together for the news today. And basically, it was an overnight, well, a lot had led up to it from what I can gather, but an overnight decision to devalue the currency by 90%. So that's one of those huge, like lots and lots of implications for a country. So can you give us sort of that top level overview to start off? What caused that Lebanon financial crisis? Because this was the result of some sort of crisis that was going on there. What was the background behind all of that?
So, these are very complex issues, but from my understanding, there's a few things going on. The main reason is that Lebanon relied a lot on kind of capital inflows. And then when the capital inflows stopped, they had this kind of piling up government debt, right? And rather than kind of paying it off or, trying to do something else, tax their citizens more, they decided to sell it off to banks for euro bonds to give them liquidity. But the problem with that is that it's kind of like a national Ponzi scheme. Like you keep having this debt, you don't pay it off, you just pass it off, keep passing it off. And eventually it culminated into mass protests because a lot of these citizens couldn't actually get their money out from banks, and banks were illegally holding on to their depositors' cash. And the ones that did get it out suffered from a mass devaluation, not an official devaluation, but a black market kind of devaluation, which we'll get into later, because at around 2019, during the protests, people woke up and the actual valuation of the currency, which was pegged at about 1,500 Lebanese pounds per US dollar. That was the pegged amount. But then over time, the black market amount, drastically went down. And even this devaluation, this official devaluation we've had now, still doesn't reach how low the marketplace has their currency as a consequence of all this.
Because there is always, in these situations, there's always a black market operating, isn't there?
Correct. And I mean, that's just one of, like I said, very complex issues. Other things that kind of caused it were just rampant corruption, and the central bank governor for Lebanon is actually under trial for his role in this.
Right.
And then you've also got banks having, as always, risky lending practices and offering crazy returns in the lead up prior to the collapse. So a massive national Ponzi.
A national Ponzi operating like it's a crypto company.
Yeah.
So what does the devaluation actually achieve? Because like you said, we've got a situation where you've got effectively a black market happening anyway. The value was already not matching what the official number was saying it was supposed to be. So what were they trying to achieve?
So it went from officially pegged at 1,507, I think to be exact, Lebanese pounds per dollar. They have now devalued it as of last night to 15,000.
Right.
And that's still trading below what the black market has at the moment, which is about 57,000. But it is
that's quite a big difference, even just in the reality of the black market, isn't it?
Yeah. So you can imagine the pain a lot of these people are having with that kind of level of devaluation. In 2020, Lebanon's inflation rate was about 85%. We get crazy here in the West if it's 7, 8, 9, 10. So they're not doing too well over there. But so effectively, you've got, in my opinion, this was probably more of a virtue signal than anything else, as the daily life of the Lebanon citizen isn't really impacted. However, which I want to get into a bit more, the lives of the financial institutions and banks are drastically affected,
Right.
because their equity was kind of their equity stakes and things of this nature was put under the exchange rate of 1,500. So even though it was really worth 57,000 Lebanese pounds per US dollar, the valuation of these companies were put at 1,500.
So you're saying that the person on the street wasn't necessarily, like, of course they've been impacted for years. It's not to say they weren't impacted.
Yeah, of course, more than anyone else.
But the financial institutions and banks, because they were operating under the official rate, they were the ones to cop the brunt of this move.
Correct. They were, and that's, I don't feel sorry for a lot of these banks, because they were the ones that kind of caused this. But this is what's mostly going to affect them more than the citizens.
So how were they treated? Can you give us a little bit of background from what you've discovered of how citizens were effectively treated versus institutions throughout that background period of time?
This is what I've found most interesting, is the difference between the two. So you've got, when everything, went to shit, you've got people can't get their money out, banks holding on to it. They just, their money went, or when they got it out, the devaluation was so much at that point in time in 2019 during the protests that it was effectively almost worthless anyway.
Yep.
And then you have this situation with financial institutions where they're given, a 5-year period, as announced last night, to like kind of restructure their losses, and they're giving a lot of different, advantages throughout this process to help them deal with this devaluation. So you've got the average person who's kind of left on the street to deal with themselves, lose all their money. Their deposits were held illegally again, and they weren't provided to them. And then you've got all these financial institutions that engaged in these risky lending practices in the first place that exacerbated the crisis. Yet again, they're given a bit more preferential treatment, which similar to probably 2008 GFC as well, where you had some of the bankers from Goldman Sachs, for example, getting massive bonuses before the crash, and then receiving bailouts and all these things. So I think it is to some extent a very common trend amongst these financial crises where the citizens struggle and the people at the top tend to get out relatively unscathed.
A little bit smoother. That just raised another question in my head as you were sort of talking about that. What do you think happens if it rolls over? Because often, and we've seen this in the past, you think about Zimbabwe, you think about other situations throughout history of massive hyperinflation or big moves in the currency. It's not necessarily a one-time thing, because now that confidence is lost officially. And I know you're effectively saying with the virtue signaling that it's the opposite, aren't you? You're saying, well, they're trying to do that to stabilize it. But often once the government acknowledges that the problem is there, it doesn't just stabilize, it then continues on that path. Do you see that that's a potential here?
Yeah, an interesting parallel to that would be the Terra Luna situation where, if anyone crypto out there, we had the stable coin UST, which was an algorithmic stable coin. And then once that depeaked from the US dollar at such an amount, even as they tried to keep getting it back up, the confidence was lost. So it was effectively irrelevant at that point. And I think we saw a similar thing in 2019 in Lebanon, where once the truth came out, the confidence was lost. It doesn't matter what you do.
Yep.
It's game over.
And we could see more of that absolutely going forward here. Yeah.
Maybe on a global level as well, and different countries too.
Absolutely. I just want to change topic slightly. We had just an excellent question come in. This was from Warwick on the email. And I wanted to talk about this because it dovetailed beautifully with this topic. So it's a bit of a longer question. I want to sort of read it out, or might summarize a little bit, but I'm interested to get your opinion on it and to have a little bit of a discussion about it, because I think a lot of people find this really interesting. So his question was effectively around gold and silver. He said, we've got gold and silver in our self-managed super fund. We charge tax on any gains that we make in its value each year. So his question was around, why should you pay tax on the rise in price of gold and silver in the self-managed super fund when the rise in price is really just the debasement of the currency by the government that's taxing you? So the gold and silver has not actually risen necessarily. It's that the fiat that you're holding has reduced. So given that inflation is just another very sneaky government tax, aren't they effectively double dipping when they tax the gold and silver on top of that? And he sort of said, it was just really great ending to that, where he said, I'm not an expert, I just have a brain. And it really got us thinking to go, you're absolutely right in that situation, because what would happen here? And I know we're obviously not in the same situation as Lebanon has been in, that led to this here. But you talk about the banks, right? So, and all of this being led by the government. If you've effectively just had a massive devaluation in your currency overnight, think about that in the terms of this question, and you go, he's like, that gold and silver has just made a fiat-based massive gain overnight that would then be taxed if it was in the current system in Australia, for example, at a very high rate. So that's the question is actually very, very interesting, and really highlights a point that, first of all, you've got inflation operating as a hidden tax, which is something that people who really look at this understand. But then you've got the real tax implications as well, that if you do have big gains that are a result of devaluation of the currency, you are really getting double tax in that situation, aren't you?
Yeah, I think old mate is doing a bit too much critical thinking on this one. He better be careful. I think he's onto something. I think we have a chart of the Lebanon pound versus gold, which we should put that up right now, and you'll see it's just like this massive spike.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
So your unrealized gain on that would be, crazy. Like, for example, for more simpler maths, if you had 100,000 in gold, and then overnight the currency devalue by 50%, you'd be taxed on an extra $100,000. So
that's right, because if you doubled your money overnight, it looks like in fiat terms that you've made 100% gain.
So even though this is an extreme example, but I think it really does a great job highlighting the point, because instead of an overnight transition, think of it as 5-year transition. Over 5 years, inflation at 2-3%, and you're going to get taxed on those movements. Not maybe, obviously it's a bit absurd to imagine this, but I mean, it is a good case study for this concept that he's talking about.
Absolutely. And I don't think that's we're providing necessarily a great answer there, but I would say we generally agree with you there, Warwick, that it is an issue that you need to be thinking about, that if we understand inflation as being a hidden tax on your money, then you are effectively paying tax twice, because you're paying tax on that again when you make that capital gain. But I suppose the flip side of that argument is you won't really care how much tax you're paying if you're in Lebanon and you've had that graph, the gain that you've made there is still better than seeing your entire value of your fiat wiped out overnight, even though, as you pointed out, that was mostly more of an institutional banking situation than actually for individuals.
That's a good point. I think, like, relatively, you'd rather be taxed in that situation, than not be in at all, and just have your currency get devalued. So very interesting question.
No, it was a great question. It really got us thinking and discussing. So we love questions like that. Well, Branko, thanks for your work on this today. It feels like such a timely reminder, because we need to, I would argue, even how we just ended there, people need to have at least some exposure to gold and silver if you think through how easy it is for a government to do something like this, because really it's a stroke of a pen. It's a decision that's made on a particular date, and all of a sudden you've wiped a large amount out of a fiat currency. So it's something that we just need to come back to all the time and remind ourselves why we want an asset that sits outside the system. So thank you for your work on that today.
Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for everyone for watching. Thanks for Warwick for that excellent question. Keep them coming in on the social platforms. We do read them all, and we like to discuss them wherever we can. That's all for us, from us for this week. I'll be back with Alex on Monday, and we'll discuss that interest rate decision and all the other major economic data that's coming out currently, because there's going to be some big impacts for us here in Australia. So until then, have a great weekend and good luck out there.